Hello, I'm Anna. I worked at the University of Bath for the last 30 years, first as a lecturer and since 1996 as a professor. My field is Italian history and politics. I've been involved in the Arrest project since the beginning, and I feel really passionate about this project, about the project as a whole, and in particular about the concept of agonistic memory, the possibility of developing and applying these concepts in ways which can prove influential and have an impact outside academia. In the last 2 decades, I also noticed that there was a shift towards a kind of memory that was focused very much on the victims and not on the suffering of the victims. And this was a good development, in many ways a positive development, but it ran the risk of really almost imposing a uniform kind of mode of remembering of the past, that it was only the victim's perspective that mattered, and it left so many groups in the shadow. It didn't explain the perpetrators, it didn't explain bystanders or traitors and so many other categories. And so I started to ask myself questions about should we remember the past in ways that are much more multi-perspectivist and much more pluralist, if you like. And we came up with this idea, obviously based on the theory by Chantal Mouffe, and so we developed this concept of agonistic memory. For Chantal Mouffe, agonism refers to the fact that politics is about, or should be about, a struggle for hegemony. But this struggle for hegemony, however strong and however passionate it is, should not degenerate into violence, so should not degenerate into what she calls antagonism. Democracy is about conflict, democracy is about struggles, so struggles and conflict are constitutive of democracy, but we should allow for the struggles around hegemony to develop in ways that political opponents view each other as adversaries and not as enemies to be eliminated, possibly even physically. So that's the starting concept. In established democracy in recent decades, there has been very much an attempt, an hegemonic attempt to depoliticize politics in some ways. So politics has turned into routine administration and an attempt to erase conflict from the democratic struggle. But this has led to an attempt to eliminate passions as well, or demonize passions as something that should not be part of the democratic struggle. And the result of all this has been that we have seen passions coming back with a vengeance in the so-called populist movements, which have risen throughout the globe, in fact, and not just in Europe. What we have is a remembering the past, which we define as cosmopolitanism. Cosmopolitan memory refers to a type of memory which focuses, as I already mentioned, focuses in particular on the plight of victims, the suffering of victims. But in a way it decontextualizes the socio-political situation in which the victims became such, in which perpetrators became perpetrators and turned to perpetratorship. And what cosmopolitan memory does is to view perpetratorship as a kind of moral evil, which remains unexplained, which somehow becomes separate from humanity. And so this concept, for instance, of a crime against humanity, but perpetratorship is part of humanity. Evil is part of what we as human beings are. What we need to understand is why, in certain contexts, in certain circumstances, we, any one of us, can become a perpetrator, or becomes a victim, or becomes a bystander, or becomes a traitor, and so on and so forth. So we need to remember the struggles of the past. We need to remember to repoliticize our memory of the past conflicts. We need to repopulate the past with figures that are not just the victims. We need to look at the perpetrators. We need to explain the perpetrators. Why do we say that we need to be reflexive about the past and about remembering the past? For various reasons. First of all, because we need to reflect on the fact that every memory is constructed, and in particular every collective memory is constructed, and is constructed for the purposes of the present. So when a populist movement, for instance, uses collective memory in a certain way, it presents it as a given, as a natural memory, but in fact it is a constructed process. So we need to expose this constructed aspect of memory building. But we need to be reflective in other ways as well. We need to, as I said, reflect upon the socio-political struggles and about the socio-political context that allowed antagonism to develop in the past, that allowed violence maybe to erupt, that allowed perpetratorship to emerge. And if we reflect on these processes, these historical processes, and the structural processes as well, obviously, as I said earlier, we need to reflect on certain categories, including the category of perpetrators. If you take a cosmopolitan approach, then dialogue tends to be promoted in a way that is rational, following the ideas of the German philosopher Habermas, leaving passions and emotions as much as possible out of the dialogue. And also dialogue tends to be seen as consensual. In other words, dialogue aims at reaching a consensus among the participants. Now, we also, as agonists, believe that dialogue is important, precisely because we are not antagonists. But it has to be an agonistic dialogue. And what do we mean by that? We mean that dialogue should not shy away from the most controversial issues, from the difficult aspects of conflict. Dialogue can be conflictual. Dialogue should bring in and take into account the participants' emotions and passions and not leave them outside the door. And in this we follow the ideas of the Russian thinker Bakhtin rather than Habermas. And dialogue should not necessarily be consensual. I mean, dialogue may result in a consensus among participants, or perhaps a partial consensus, but that should not be the goal of the dialogue at the beginning. The goal is to expose the differences between the participants, to expose also the dissonant aspects among the participants, and the important thing is that they listen to each other's positioning, but not necessarily achieving a consensus. We have witnessed, as I said earlier, the rise of populist movements who, with the use of rhetoric, with the use of images, sometimes very shocking register, both in words and images, they really can arouse people's emotions and passions. And this is very important. It's always been an important part of politics and of political struggles. And pretending that emotions and passions can be ignored, pretending that political communication and political behavior can be based just on rational behavior is really an illusion. So we need to bring emotions and passions back in and understand that when people have certain collective grievances, when they have certain collective needs, when they have a collective anger, they bring their emotions into their politics. They bring their emotions also into their voting, as we have seen in recent times. And we need to deal with that. We need to take it very seriously. And rather than tell them, you're behaving emotionally and you should behave rationally. That's not what this is about, what agonism is about. So we take them passions seriously, and political passions are a good thing. As I said, is what motivates people to act, to mobilize, to act as citizens. But we need to make sure that these passions and emotions are put to the service of democracy and democratic institutions rather than to the service of destructive antagonism. What are the main shortcomings? It has been pointed to us on different occasions that in post-conflict societies especially, to promote agonism as a whole and to promote agonistic dialogue might be counterproductive in the sense that it might refuel the conflicts of the past and simply harden people's attitudes and behavior. And so some of the critics have pointed out that in post-conflict society it might be better to adopt either a cosmopolitan approach. How should we deal with these shortcomings? Obviously we accept that in post-conflict societies the context is very delicate, that the peace that has been established in some cases may be fragile, and so we would not, in those contexts, promote agonism tout court, if you like, and we would proceed step by step. But on the other hand, we would maintain that we could perhaps promote some elements of agonism. So I think what I've been talking until now has been mainly ideal types. Antagonism, cosmopolitanism, agonism are ideal types. In reality, we find often a hybrid situation where with elements from all three, perhaps. And so if that is the case, then in post-conflict societies we can promote elements of agonism when it's possible, where it is possible. We recognize that cosmopolitanism has presents aspects that we agree with. We do agree with, for instance, considering the other and others as human beings in the same way as we are. We do agree that we need to demystify and expose the constructed character of cultural and collective memories. And we do agree that we need to defend human rights and stand up for human rights. So obviously these are kind of struggles and platforms where there can be an agreement and a common positioning between cosmopolitans and agonists. But we would definitely want to go further than just defending human rights. Defending human rights in an abstract way or at the individual way, again takes us far from understanding political struggles, participating in political struggles, and enhancing democracy through struggles again around hegemony.